Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, March 27th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevin and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So this Thursday morning, Attorney General Pam Bondi tweeted out that, quote, "Our brave law enforcement officers conducted a successful operation that captured a top MS-13 national leader. DOJ will not rest until we make America safe again." So what happened was the feds arrested a 24-year-old Salvadoran in Dale City, Virginia. That's about 30 miles south of D.C. He's reportedly the gang's East Coast leader. This is being touted as a victory for Team Trump in their war against Latin American gangs. Tom, is this a good day for the administration in a week that they could probably use some good news?
I was going to say, it's nice for them to sort of shift the narrative or have some news that allows them to talk about something else, because this week has not been the greatest week in the administration thus far. But yeah, I mean, this is good news, right? I mean, this is part of what he promised. Trump tweeted out, Tom Homan's a superstar. This is part of what the administration was elected to do. And again, focused on criminals first. And by all accounts, this gentleman was a bad guy who was,
Which is it, Tom? Is he a gentleman or a thug?
Good point, Carl. This thug this guy was a bad guy. And the administration got him. Kash Patel has been tweeting out how the administration's been rounding up, a bunch of folks on the 10 most wanted list just in the first few weeks. So the law and order piece of this and getting criminals and getting them locked up or kicked out of the country, that's a good thing for the administration. It's a good thing for the country.
Carl, you see it that way? You're sure he's going to get due process and all that good stuff, right?
Well, that's my concern. Look, I think Tom's right about the politics of it. And as far as the merits of it, I don't think foreign nationals who are criminals or have a right to be in this country. But the question is, are they really criminals? Or are they getting the right people? Now, what the Trump administration is doing by going after people who are illegal, and I'm not talking about these free speech cases or these pro-Hamas rabble rousers who come over in student visas and then lead demonstrations. That's kind of a separate thing. But these people they're rounding up, they say this guy's the East Coast, kingpin of MS-13. Well, maybe he is, maybe he isn't. I don't, if it was a court of law, he'd be able to present a case. Oh, I'm not that guy. That's another guy with a similar name. I'm not him, or whatever. But then the people are, if they're not here illegally, the Trump administration, the old phrase, round them up and let God sort it out. They're rounding them all up and letting the INS, sort out. Because if they're not even here illegally, then you can deport them anyway. So what the Trump administration is doing here is Tom point after people they suspect of being criminals, and I hope they have good, strong evidence. I assume they do. And then even if it's not, if it's not a cut and dry case, they couldn't get a conviction in court of law, they're still here illegally, and they're sending them home. I think they're on safe grounds with the majority of American people.
Yeah, this is interesting to me because this is in Virginia. This was part of a joint task force. They've arrested 250 people in Virginia alone. So this is kind of, and I think Virginia has got the sort of the piloting this joint task force thing where they have state officials and federal officials sort of cooperating. I don't know if they'll get that kind of cooperation, Tom, in other districts or other states, including where you live. But
you think?
Yeah.
Jamie Pritzker and Brandon Johnson are going to cooperate with his task force?
Well, MS-13 is, they're based in. Look, they came out of the California prison gang. They are not a foreign prison gang per se. They started in the California prison system, and MS-13 was originally Salvadorans who were, in opposition to the other gangs in the prisons there, the Black Guerrilla Family, the Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, and the Aryan Brotherhood. It was a protective gang. They were into rock and roll music. It was kind of an idiosyncratic thing, and witchcraft and other things. They've morphed over the decades into, a gang that commits murder and does, imports drugs and extorts people. But but we should remind ourselves we don't want to sound too xenophobic on this show. Its origins are in the California prison system.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Although it is now a designated terrorist organization. Other immigration news, Kristi Noem, our Homeland Security Secretary, on Wednesday, she visited the El Salvadoran prison where these alleged Venezuelan gang members are being held since they've been removed from American soil. She recorded a PSA of sorts. I'm going to play it for you guys and get your reaction. And for people listening on the radio, she's standing in front of a bunch of guys in prison behind her. It's a pretty interesting PSA. Here you go.
Here at CCOT today and visiting this facility. And first of all, I want to thank El Salvador and their president for their partnership with the United States of America to bring our terrorists here and to incarcerate them and have consequences for the violence that they have perpetuated in our communities. I also want everybody to know, if you come to our country illegally, this is one of the consequences you could face. First of all, do not come to our country illegally. You will be removed and you will be prosecuted. But know that this facility is one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use if you commit crimes against the American people.
So, Carl, it's kind of classic Kristi Noem. I mean, she's sort of known for her television savvy, but what'd you make of this sort of PSA, I guess you could call it?
Yeah, it's like almost like a campaign ad, and they're trying to send word to Central America, to these people, that the Biden administration's rules are changed. And I think most people there have that word, but they're making no mistake about it. But I had a different reaction. I'd like to ask you guys what you thought. So these are Venezuelans. They're Venezuelans, not Salvadorans, in Salvador's prisons, because the government's agreed to take them, I assume, in return for some sort of foreign aid or some favor or some consideration.
We're paying them money.
Yeah, but we had like 5 million illegal people come during Biden administration alone. That's like twice the population of Salvador itself. They can't all go to prison in El Salvador. It kind of raises the logistical question to me is, where are these people going to go? And also it seems that the government's going to have, our government's going to have to open up negotiations with Venezuela when the two countries do not get along, as you guys know. But I just, sending people randomly to a third country is something that, after a while, I think people are going to have questions about.
It did make me think, if I were just watching that ad, I wouldn't want to be one of those guys behind her in that cage. That didn't look like a lot of fun.
I was torn over it. I mean, I get the message that they are trying to send in the strongest possible way, the message that the border is closed. The Biden administration, they sometimes, Kamala Harris went to Central America and said the border was closed, but it was always open, and everybody knew that. On the other hand, it was kind of a striking visual and one that was kind of like, is that, is that really, is that the kind of message that the administration wants to send, or does it give ammunition to their critics that they're being a little overly sensationalistic about this? And look, to Carl's point earlier, right? We want to get, the people who have committed crimes, right? And we can verify if they've committed a crime, send them out. But if they haven't committed crimes, if they've just come across the border illegally, that is a crime. And it seems like the administration is working to get those folks as well. But those aren't the kind of people that you would send to a prison. You just want them, send them back to their original country. And we do have to have, and we have been working with other countries to try and get them to take back folks who have come into our country illegally. So look, it's part of the administration's overall strategy. Again, I think they have pretty wide latitude with the public on what their message is and what they've been doing so far. And so I don't suspect this is going to hurt them in any way.
I will say, just before I leave on this topic, I don't think it's a good look to be using these kinds of people as sort of backdrop for a PSA. It just makes me uncomfortable. It just feels wrong to me.
Kind of the opposite of the Statue of Liberty, isn't it? It's the yin and the yang.
I mean, that was, I guess you're making the point more succinctly than I was making it, Andy. That's kind of what I was getting at, is like, this opens them up to criticism that they're being somehow insensitive, or because it was a pretty striking visual. There's no question about it.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm here with Tom and Carl. And hey, we have an election to look forward to, guys. I know how much you guys miss talking about campaigns. But this coming Tuesday, there was a special election in Florida to fill the seat vacated by former Representative Mike Waltz, who, at least for now, is the National Security Advisor at the White House. So, Tom, this is the 6th congressional district. It went for Trump. It's considered a safe seat, but it's a competitive race. So tell us what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Trump, what, he went plus 30 or something. I mean, this is a deep red district in Florida. And it seems like it's competitive, and that has to be concerning. There was just a story out earlier today about how, you know, the GOP's like sending in the cavalry. Trump's going to be doing some ads and messaging there. You know, Don Trump Jr. This is Ron DeSantis's old district that he was in before he got, you know, elected governor. So everybody's trying to pitch in and help stave off what would be a real shocking upset. I mean, there was. Obviously, Democrats won a seat, state Senate seat in Pennsylvania a few days ago that was a Trump district in 2024. And I think they won it by just a couple of hundred votes. They do not want to see a repeat of that. That would be, but even the fact that this is as competitive as it looks to be on the surface suggests that, you know, we've talked a lot about how the Democrats and how they, you know, their approval ratings, their favorable ratings are in the tank and all of that. But in these special elections where they're low turnout, if they're motivated, it looks like Democrats are motivated, maybe even more motivated than Republicans. You can get some upsets like this, and that would not be a good storyline for the Republican Party.
Yeah. So, Carl, this is Josh Weil is the challenger. He's a Democrat. He's raised about $9 million.
So much money.
The GOP guy is State Senator Randy Fine. He's raised less than $1 million. That's part of the problem, I guess. But what do you make of the race? And I mean, it's within the margin of error. I think that's what the polling is saying right now.
Well, what I was going to bring up that money, and it's going to be, the gap is going to be much even larger than that. They're going to be outspent there 10-1. And most of that money is not from that district. Most of it, the Democrats' money is not from the state of Florida. I don't need to name the state where a lot of it's coming from because I grew up there. But the Democrats would really like to pick off the seat for the reasons that you and Tom mentioned, because it was Ron DeSantis' seat, because Trump carried it easily. I think my guess is the Republicans will pull it out. But if it's even close, that's going to send, it should send shockwaves to the Republican congressional committees, because, you know, these House races have already started for 2026. And if they're running close in this district, they're going to lose all kinds, and that pattern holds. They're going to lose all kinds of other districts. Now, the Democrats won't be able to raise the kind of money in all, you know, across the country that they did in this district. But it shows you what they're willing to do. The Democratic fundraisers and the new head of the DNC, they're willing to go out and spend this kind of money for a House race that looks like an uphill battle. It shows you that the midterms are going to be a real challenge for Republicans.
Yeah. Well, and not only the midterms, but Matt Gaetz's seat is up, I think, April 11th. There's another special election. That's right. And I think when they were putting together this cabinet, they were counting on these as being very safe seats, and they wouldn't.
I wondered about that at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. But you put it all together and you think, well, okay, Matt Gaetz gave up a seat and he's out. Who knows what's going to happen, you know, with the National Security Advisor. They may be sort of trading away seats
well, it'd be
without
ironic.
getting anything in return.
Well, think if you put these people in your cabinet. Gates already didn't make the cabinet. Waltz is not in the cabinet. He's National Security Advisor, hanging on by his fingernails this week. If you got these guys and then you lose a few special elections, I mean, I guess
you could lose the House.
Hakeem Jeffries' fantasy is that he wouldn't have to wait for the midterms to become Speaker.
Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, Gaetz didn't have to resign, right? He could have stayed there.
Sure.
I mean, there was speculation that he did it so that he would avoid the ethics, you know, thing that was filed against him. So he might have had other motives, but he didn't have to do that. And yeah, look, it's a tough situation for Republicans. It's tough for Mike Johnson to have a the small majority that he has, and to for it to can't get much smaller. Let's put it that way without flipping.
Maybe Tom Massey will say that he'll vote for this Republican speaker if he's the speaker. Otherwise,
Well, I want to talk about one other thing, and that's this House oversight hearings yesterday on NPR and PBS. Marjorie Taylor Greene led the GOP effort. They accusing NPR's and CEO Catherine Maher and PBS President Paula Kruger of biased programming. Here's a little bit of the hearing. This is William Timmons from South Carolina talking to Catherine Maher from NPR.
Do you believe that America is addicted to white supremacy?
I believe that I tweeted that, and as I've said earlier, I believe much of my thinking has evolved over the last half decade.
It has evolved. Why did you tweet that?
I don't recall the exact context, sir, so I wouldn't be able to say.
Okay. Do you believe that America believes in black plunder and white democracy?
I don't believe that, sir.
You tweeted that in reference to a book you were reading at the time, apparently, The Case for Reparations.
I don't think I've ever read that book, sir.
You tweeted about it. You said you took a day off to fully read The Case for Reparations. You put that on Twitter in January of 2020.
Apologies, I don't recall that I did.
So, Carl, not a great day for NPR, I suppose, but...
Carl, do you normally forget about books that you've read 4 years earlier? You just completely draw a blank?
That you've tweeted about?
That you've tweeted about?
well, she said she took the day off to read the book, and I don't know. Listen, I felt I'm no fan of her. When she was at Wikipedia, she gave speeches, TED Talks and stuff, which she basically said the First Amendment was inconvenient, inconvenient barrier to censorship because she's, Wikipedia is supposed to, lead people towards outcomes. She's not a defender of the press. She's never been a member of the press. And then all of a sudden she's leading this organization. The other thing that happened at the hearing, somebody asked her, I forget the number. You have 97 registered Democrats. 87 is 0 Republicans. Is that a problem? She acknowledged that wasn't a great look. But this withering cross-examination, she was so uncomfortable. I ended up feeling sorry for her. But the larger context here is, Andy, is that if you're a Republican, you're thinking, why should the government fund this agency if it's led by this woman who's so one-sided in her outlook, and everybody, NPR is a dedicated audience, but it's long ago stopped trying to tell. It sort of tells one side of the story. Can I say that? Is that?
I think that's fair. It's $535 million a year that goes to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and then is passed on to PBS and NPR.
Wait a minute.
Target for DOGE?
What if they gave us, half of that? Their RCP, the other? No, that I wouldn't.
I don't know. Not if they're going to go through your tweets, maybe. But
exactly. That's what I was thinking about. Tom answering questions about his tweets when Hakeem Jeffries takes over and it's a Democrat running the committee.
Yeah. Well, Tom, we got about a minute left here.
I only get a minute.
NPR, PBS, what's going to happen?
Sorry, Tom.
You've totally shut me out. My rants have gotten too crazy. Look, this woman is a menace. There's just no other way to describe it. I mean, as Carl said, she's on record saying that, we shouldn't pursue the truth. It's inconvenient. The First Amendment's inconvenient. She's like the worst case scenario of a total ideologue who's masquerading as some sort of journalist and runs an organization that is 100%, one-sided. And everybody knows it. She couldn't admit it yesterday, which was kind of silly, trying to insist that somehow, I've never seen any political bias at NPR. It's like, come on. Really? And yeah, I don't think the American taxpayers, half the country, at least, that voted for Trump, do they want their tax dollars going to fund an organization that basically runs, counter to their worldview, isn't even getting balanced? We talked about this before. Trump's been sort of attacking some of these institutions and trying to, draw them back into balance, at least a little bit, the ones that have gone, 90-10 or whatever. I don't think that NPR and PBS. I don't think they can be salvaged. I don't think there's any way. I think you have to close them down. I just don't know that there would ever be a scenario where they could be brought back into balance that would justify the amount of money that taxpayers are spending on them.
Well, people have been trying since the foundation of corporation public broadcasting in the 60s to do this, and it hasn't happened yet. And I will say there's a new Pew research survey out. 24% say Congress should remove federal funding. 43%, I'm sorry, say they should continue to receive funding. 33% say they are not sure. So it's pretty popular still. Just something to keep in mind. Anyway, we're gonna have to leave it there. Sorry, Tom. Oh, if you could see Tom's face, gang.
You can if you're watching our YouTube channel.
Yeah, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. We'll be right back with more after this.
Hello and welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Philip Wegman, White House correspondent for RCP. Each day across the country, nearly 3 million Americans fly commercially. We get to the airport early, we wait in line, and many of us, without even thinking, allow TSA to scan our face without knowing that there is a right to opt out of biometric screening. More than any other lawmaker, our next guest, Democratic Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley, has led the charge to change this. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, Philip.
So to start, Senator, if biometric screening is entirely optional, and if I've already given my data to Apple and a dozen other companies, why all the fuss about this?
But what I'm really concerned about is the way that facial recognition is used to encroach upon freedom and privacy. And we see that around the world. We see China enslaving 1 million Uyghurs, and a powerful tool they use is facial recognition. That software has gone to half a dozen other countries that have used it to control dissidents in their nation. And it's so inexpensive and it's so pervasive. And you put that power in the hands of a government, and you never know where that government's going to go. But it's possible an authoritarian inclined executive, even here in the United States, might decide to track those people that they disagree with. And suddenly you have a national database, you have a national software screening it, and they're tracking down all the people that are protesting the direction of the government. And suddenly our freedom, our privacy, our freedom of speech and assembly are all powerfully affected. This is not the kind of tool you want to give to a government in a freedom-loving country.
And in fact, you've actually had experience with this yourself, not just in the committee, but here at Reagan National Airport, where you've been trying to catch a flight, and you've sort of realized that perhaps sometimes this screening isn't exactly voluntary.
Well, you would never know that you had the ability to opt out at any airport where they had implemented this program. They were expanding it from about 24 to about 400 airports when I undertook this quest to say, hey, wait, what's going on here? This fast expansion to all the major airports across America is the establishment of a national surveillance system controlled by the U.S. government. And people are just unaware, and it's happening so fast. How'd they even get permission to do this? Well, their permission was back in 2001, after the attack on the Twin Towers. The government said you can experiment with biometric screening at airports. It certainly wasn't an indication to go do it, and it certainly wasn't facial recognition, because at the time the idea was fingerprints. Well, fingerprints are something entirely different. Like as you're walking down the street, the government can't take a picture of you and tell what your fingerprint is. But facial recognition technology came along, combine that with the permission granted in 2001 to experiment with biotechnology. And the TSA says, you know what, we can run with this. Congress has never debated it, not in a committee, not on the floor, but we can run and establish a biometric only facial recognition system. And that's what they're en route to doing. In fact, the head of TSA previously said, we intend to make it the only way that you can travel in our country.
So one of the things that you'll notice anytime you go through security is that there's a little plaque there that says that this screening is entirely voluntary and that it's possible to opt out. But Should we take the TSA at their word? Is this a voluntary process when a TSA agent with a badge says to step in front of the camera, or is there actually some coercion going on here?
Well, those little plaques are the result of my advocacy, and I've called TSA. I've given them a very hard time. I've given them scripts to write. They have all kinds of signs on the way in, but they had nothing saying it was voluntary. And after much pressing, they started to put up a few signs. But even as you see that little plaque you're talking about, there is a smart pad that says follow the officer's instructions. And what is the first instruction you hear from that officer? Step in front of the camera. And so people in that setting, knowing that security is a big deal at airports, are absolutely intimidated to do anything other than follow what the officer says. Are they going to be knocked to the ground? Are they going to be pulled aside? Are they going to be delayed by 15 minutes? Who knows? So I have gone through these checkpoints all over the country, always insisting on using my driver's license. And it has been a range of experiences. But gradually, TSA has done some more training and has put up some more signs, but nobody really believes them. This is it's just as long as the officer is saying step in front of that camera, people are like, I better do that. Even my own staff has experimented with this, and they feel intimidated. They'll go, we know the senator says we have the right to do this. We saw the sign, but I was ordered to step in front of the camera. It's really hard not to do that. So this is why we have to change the dynamic through legislation, guarantee the fact that Americans do not have to use facial recognition, do not have to allow the government to build this national surveillance system. But we have to act now because it's happening really fast.
Well, should we take TSA at their word? I think I know what you're going to say, but should we take them at their word when they say that they're not going to be saving this biometric data? They're not going to be saving the facial recognition scans, or perhaps more importantly, the face print, that numerical series of ones and zeros behind this. Is it really truly deleted within 24 hours?
Well, let's talk about the pre-check system. And the answer is that is absolutely false. And they put up signs said your information is deleted immediately. That is not true. In pre-check, when you sign up for pre-check, hidden in that contract is the ability of them to retain your data. And they say they can retain it data for a period of time for, quote, research purposes. And you have no idea how long they're going to hold on to that. Just on my last trips through Reagan, I saw a new sign that said, your data may be retained for research purposes, because I keep coming back to them and saying, you are lying to the American public. And they keep doing little tiny adjustments, normally in Reagan first, and maybe some of that creeps into a few of the other airports, but they have never been forthcoming in trying to have citizens truly understand the opportunity. And they have put up arguments that are simply false. The first argument that they say is it's a lot faster to use facial recognition. I've timed this at airports where people are using facial recognition, not using facial recognition. In the Portland airport, they've had one stand that doesn't use the photo machine, because I gave Portland a very hard time in my home Oregon. And it's actually almost faster using your ID, because you don't have to tell the person to step in front of the camera. You don't have to wait for the computer to respond. They scan your driver's license. They look at your face. They go, okay. And so that was a false argument that this is about efficiency. Then they said it's about security. We're going to catch the bad folks coming into our country. Well, we're talking about travel within the United States, not about folks coming into our country. To date, there is no known case of catching a dangerous individual using this, forcing people to use this technology. Well, you might say, well, someday maybe somebody will be caught. Well, yes, there's always the possibility of one person someday, but how much loss of freedom and privacy are we willing to tolerate for a once every few years a clue to someone who might be up something? And here's the thing. They say, well, you know what? We'd be more likely to catch someone if everyone was required to have their photo taken. But if that's the case, and you have a bad actor, well, instead of taking the plane to the next city, they're going to take the train. So now we're going to put facial recognition on the train. Oh, wait, now they're going to take the bus. Oh, now they're going to rent a car. Oh, now they're going to buy a car. We're going to take their picture every time they drive down the freeway to find them. In other words, the national security argument is not true now. It would never be true unless this is a system that tracks us everywhere all the time. So it's not a national security case. It's not an efficiency case. Why are they determined to do this? Well, one, they think in the long term it'll save them and reduce the number of TS agents that they hire. They might not even have to have an agent. You might just enter one of those corridors like you do exiting an airport now, where maybe the doors don't open like they do when you're leaving Reagan National Airport until they've taken your picture and you're able to enter. Some of the airlines want to use facial recognition as a substitute for paper all the way through, including how you get on the plane and how you drop off your luggage. There's nobody checking your ID at any point. So maybe cost savings for the airports. We need to act now to stop our government from having a powerful tool to control individuals across this nation.
Yeah, a real world application here. There was a Border Patrol document from 2022 that said for in-scope passengers, which is non-citizens, there's no guarantee that that scan is deleted. And I'm quoting from the document now. It says that scans, quote, can be retained for 75 years in support of immigration, border management, and law enforcement activities. Are there any indications as of now that the Trump administration is using some of this biometric data gathered from TSA for their deportation efforts?
Do not know. But here's a distinction I want to emphasize. There is a whole separate organization, Customs and Border Protection at the border. So it's not TSA, and it's not about travel inside the United States. I have not taken on the cause of saying we shouldn't use facial recognition at the border. It has actually provided some security benefits at moments. I think that is a different question from travel within the United States. And now you've raised an additional question. To what degree are photos continue to be used for decades on forward? Just like fingerprints sit on a file forever once they've been taken, right? And even folks whose pictures are taken and then they later become citizens, no guarantee those are deleted. So you could have the government tracking everyone who's naturalized for the rest of their lives. It's an encroaching technology that we have, and the fact that Congress has never had serious debates or green-lighted this to happen, we're just stumbling forward into this world of the government tracking us everywhere we go, with not even our Congress paying attention, holding hearings, debating laws, and that's what I'm trying to change.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Merkley. It's rare in Washington, D.C. when you have folks like Senator Marshall, Kennedy, Cruz behind the same issue as Senator Elizabeth Warren and yourself. That's the result, no doubt, of your efforts here. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm Philip Wegman. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, talking now with Mike Abramowitz, head of Voice of America, at least for now. You ran Freedom House for years. Before that, star reporter and editor at the Washington Times. And I'm on the record. I wrote a piece about you for Real Clear Politics last year. I guess I'm on the record saying you're just a great American.
Well, thank you, Carl. That was very, I don't know. I had my publicist pay you big bucks to do that piece. No, thank you.
Hey, welcome to the show. Look, I want to ask you about what Voice of America is going through right now and your efforts to try and save it. What the title there is it Director of Voice of America, or is that your?
I'm still the Director of Voice of America, although,
yeah,
as we'll talk about, I'm on administrative leave.
Yeah. So, but before that, I want to talk just briefly about one of your predecessors, Richard Carlson. Those of us who knew him in California knew him as Dick Carlson. He was a very well-known investigative journalist, and then came to Washington in the Reagan administration. He was a Republican, and he ran Voice of America for a while during Ronald Reagan's term, and had a long and storied career. People know him now, I guess, as Tucker Carlson's father, but I knew him before Tucker was ever born. And he was just a wonderful person and a hell of a reporter. But what kind of legacy did he leave at VOA?
Well, sadly, I did not know Mr. Carlson. I think he was pretty elderly before he died, and I just never had the good fortune to meet him. But he's really kind of one of the legends at Voice of America. He was appointed by President Reagan in 1986, and I believe he may have been the longest serving director of Voice of America, who's director for about 6 years, and then he became the head of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And, he's kind of a classic, kind of Voice of America person. He was a straight news person, and he always felt that Voice of America should be about straight news and telling it both, different sides of issues. But he also believed that the editorials at Voice of America, which we had back in those days, could reflect the point of view of the administration, which it did. And so I think that was he was a perfect leader for VOA at that time. And he also was actually present for a lot of the very significant events in VOA history. I think the one that really comes to mind is the VOA coverage of the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989. And under VOA at the time was a hugely influential source of news for the Chinese students that were protesting the Chinese Communist government. And VOA has a very proud history during that time. And that all happened under Dick Carlson.
Well, Mike, that's a good segue into what I want to ask you about. I'll just ask you directly. Is VOA still necessary? Does it still fulfill its historic role? Some people think in this day and age with the internet and unlimited access to streaming, and every cab driver in Nairobi has a cell phone, that it's not needed anymore. But I know you don't agree. So tell our listeners why you think it's still valuable, and whether it still serves that function that it did during the Tiananmen Square, for instance, and during the Hungarian Revolution and other signal moments in American history, in foreign history.
Well, listen, I totally believe in the mission of Voice of America. It's a very valuable and unique mission, and I really believe that Voice of America is a priceless asset for the United States. Putting aside the journalism, which is terrific, but just as a national security asset for the United States. Right now, we have a global audience of 360 million people weekly who come to us either through TV, radio, digital. And that's a huge audience. I believe we might be even bigger than the BBC. And that news is coming to people in almost 50 different languages: Chinese, Russian, Spanish, a lot of languages I didn't even know before I got here, Bambara. So it's really one of the few news services in the world that tells the story of America in a journalistically sound way for people in their local languages and in a way that they really understand. And that's really still a very relevant asset. Obviously the world has changed a lot since the Cold War, but we know that our rivals as a country, China in particular, Iran, Venezuela, Russia, they are flooding the zone, if you will, with really tons of propaganda, lies, especially about America. They're really tearing down America. And VOA, I believe, is a very valuable resource to push back against those narratives. It's really important that people around the world have the facts about America. And, I think generally the story of America is a great story. It doesn't mean we're perfect. And I think VOA is a great platform for that. And honestly, it will really help the Trump administration if they kept Voice of America. I really believe that. It will really help the Trump administration. And I think it's unwise for them to be trying to shut it down.
You're listening to Michael Abramowitz, Director of Voice of America. I'm Carl Cannon, RealClearPolitics, Washington Bureau Chief. You're listening to us on SiriusXM Radio, or maybe on our podcast or YouTube channel. Mike, let me ask you: the Trump administration seems to think that VOA doesn't tell America's story. That there's been it's never made the case directly to there's not one speech you can go to, but some of the chatter and choosing Carrie Lake to come in there and advise them, they seem, you hear this sniping that VOA doesn't any longer tell the story of America as though it's proud of America. Is this a fair criticism?
All I can say, Carl, is that does not comport with the VOA I know. I've been there less than a year, admittedly. VOA is a giant enterprise. Giant is all relative. I mean, it's about 1,300 workers and maybe another 400 or 500 stringers overseas. That's before we were shut down. But we are actually there's a lot of focus, if you will, on our English language newsroom, which is really a small part of VOA. And really, when I think about VOA, I think of our Mandarin service. I think of our Iranian, what we call it, the Persian News Network. These are places that are providing news in real time about America to the people who are living under tyranny and don't have another source of that information. I think, for instance, just about the coverage of the campaign and the coverage of the, election. We had in the Mandarin service did a talk show. Basically, the Chinese people like talk shows apparently because they like coming to VOA because they know they're not going to get state authorized information, and they also know that they're going to get kind of a balance of views. So we had a talk show in Chinese, in Mandarin, between someone who really had served in the Trump administration the first time and someone who was a more democratic think tank guy. It was in Mandarin. It was a very respectful conversation about sort of the future of U.S.-China relations in America. That video alone got hundreds of thousands of views in China. And when one of the people on that video went to Beijing a couple of weeks later, when he did a speech at Beijing University, a lot of the Chinese students came up to him and said, "Oh, I heard you on VOA." And by the way, these are exactly the kind of people that people need to reach in America. So I really believe, Carl, you've been in journalism for, I'm guessing now, 80 years, no, maybe 30, 40 years. But every news organization in the world makes mistakes. And I'm not going to sit here and say that VOA doesn't make mistakes. We have. And, the thing I think that's interesting about VOA is that by law, by our charter, we are supposed to be present the news objectively, fair, and straight. And when we fall short, we correct the errors. And by the way, if Congress or anyone else feels that we need to do a better job, there's ways to mandate balanced coverage. I mean, that's in the law, and so that's something that I think we can address if there are concerns in Congress about that.
Mike, I want to ask you about a column. Andrew Walworth, who's a co-host of mine on this show, and he actually moderates the show. He wrote a column about VOA and sort of suggesting that it's neither a fish nor a fowl, that it wants to be an objective newsroom like you just described, but it's, maybe it should be under the auspices, but it's under the auspices of the government. And so maybe it should be more, overtly, I don't want to use the propaganda, but sort of pro-American and not adhere to the journalistic, the traditional journalistic values that you and I grew up with and still practice about giving both sides.
Right. Well, first of all, I want to make a point, Carl, is that I think we have to have a reasoned debate about this. VOA for much of its history was part of the State Department. And then in the 80s, it was broken out into its current structure underneath this, what was called the Broadcasting Board of Governors and now the U.S. Agency for Global Media. So I'm not here to say that it has to be independent or has to be under the State Department. That's up to Congress and the president to decide what the best home for it. The one thing I will say is that we are in a world in which our populations in America and elsewhere, but let's just talk beyond our borders, because we're really not supposed to broadcast in the United States. Although people see us from time to time, obviously. But around the world, people are awash in propaganda, in lies, in disinformation. I think that there is still a role for a straightforward news organization that's funded by the U.S. government that provides the news straight. And I believe in that. And I think it's actually in the U.S. interest to have such a news organization. It doesn't mean that we can't also have parts of the government that tell a stronger, narrative. But one of the things that's really great about Voice of America is the high level of trust. Whenever we do surveys about Voice of America, we always find that 80-90% of people trust what they hear in Voice of America. When the helicopter of the president of Iran went down in the summer, the Iranian people came to Voice of America because they knew that they would get the straight scoop about what would happen, and they weren't getting that from Iran state TV. So I think that reputation for trust, not everyone believes it, We don't always, live up to our ideals as well as we should, but that reputation is priceless. And so I think if VOA was just seen as the voice of the current administration, whoever the president is, I think that we would be much less effective. And so I really believe very much in that journalistic mission, but for a purpose, getting news into people living under tyranny, combating fake news with actual news.
So like when those people in China are hearing us debate, a Trump person and a Biden person, they're thinking, well, we don't get this kind of thing here.
Exactly. That's not a debate that they are hearing in China.
Yeah.
They're just getting state authorized news.
All right. Hey, we have one more minute. But I want to ask you about this lawsuit. You've now gone to court to try and preserve Radio Free Europe and Voice of America, I guess, that suing the Trump administration. What's again, one minute or less, 30 seconds. What's the cause of action and what's the next step?
Honestly, Carl, I did not want to do this. I really felt that, and I'm saying this sincerely, you've known me for 30 years. This is the honest truth. I was ready to leave the Voice of America. I really was. And I was not a political appointment by Biden. I'm a civil servant, but the president indicated he wants someone different to be the head of Voice of America. I wanted to help her. I wanted to help the new administration. And what's happened is that, for reasons that are kind of unclear to me, they are moving very rapidly to shut the agency down. And really the purpose of the lawsuit is to kind of slow that process down, get my team back up and running so that there can be a reasoned debate in Congress about what kind of Voice of America there needs to be. That's really the purpose of the lawsuit.
All right. Well, look, your lawsuit's either going to succeed or it fails. If it succeeds, we'll have you back on to talk about what's new and exciting at the reconstituted Voice of America. If it
Won't
fails,
you have on even if my Voice America fails? Even if the lawsuit fails?
No, if it fails, I'll have you on in whatever your new incarnation is, because you were a dynamic leader at Freedom House. And if it fails, wherever you end up, we'll still want to hear your voice, Michael.
Thank you, Carl. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to your listeners.